Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindelof.
And I'm Frida Wara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindelof.
And I'm Frida Wara.
Well, welcome once again to another one of our Lake Superior podcasts. And Frida, today you are helping set this one up. You've got a really interesting person here for us to chat with.
You know, Walt, I love when people come back from national parks and they have really amazing adventures and they share their stories. But what's really exciting is when you have a photographer that gets on the property. They spend some time looking through that lens, finding that story that then becomes part of either a documentary or a book or just something we can all share.
Right.
And when that photographer is at the level of Drew Rush, who you're going to get a chance to meet today, I mean, he's the kind of guy that gives you goose pimples just with what he's been able to capture. And when you look at his images that he has on his websites and other places that you can find him, you will understand that this man knows how to hunt with a camera.
And the other thing about it is, Frida, is photographers allow those of us that maybe can't make the trip to the park, to the area, to see it, and especially with a special eye like Drew Rush. Drew is a photographer, an educator, a naturalist. He joins us now. Drew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You're a photographer by definition. I guess the question is how did you get into that? And then I understand you have some National Geographic experience as a photographer. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How did you get there?
You know, I think just getting into it as a kid, I was, my father was always into photography. So I think that was really my first kind of, exposure to it, if you will. And so, I would always mess around with his old cameras and things like that. And then as I got older, he would let me start using them. And so I'd kind of mess around with them. And I kind of put it away for a little bit when I was in college. I was doing other things. And my dad also spent a lot of time growing up in the Jackson Hole area. And so I kind of gravitated towards that spot as well, and I started going up there in the summertime, and I just ended up kind of doing seasonal work. Started out doing fishing trips, and when I did that, I kind of started getting back into the photo stuff. I started picking it up again, and I kind of started saving up some of my money, some of my tip money, and buying camera equipment.
Now, you have a home base, Laramie, Wyoming, heart of Yellowstone, that part of the country, but I understand that you did some work and have gotten to do some work at Isle Royale. How did that come to be?
I was in Washington, D.C. at the National Geographic headquarters. Every year they have a big summit where a lot of the image makers get together and share their work or talk about ideas. And guide underwater specialist was there, a really fantastic guy named Lou Lamar. And he was kind of talking to me about working on this project in Isle Royale with the foundation to create this educational content for Curiosity Stream. And he said that they needed some help with some camera trap, with some remote camera work, which is my specialty. And if I would be interested, he'd be happy to introduce me to a few folks, and that's how it all kind of came to be.
Wow. So just by chance, I'm so glad that you two connected, because I have to find out first, though, had you been to Lake Superior before that, or do you remember when you first saw that big blue?
Well, I was thinking about it. My, growing up, my parents were divorced, so I would spend the school year in Wyoming. I would spend the summers with my mom, and she was up in Kenosha, Wisconsin for a little while, and I think it was probably around that time, but I don't really remember it really clearly. But, now I think the first time was driving up there with Dave Miller, part of the foundation, part of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. I drove to his house kind of not knowing anybody, not having done this stuff, and we drove up, and that was it. The time before that it was frozen, so I don't really count that because it was in the winter time.
Yeah, and it's different. Yeah, very different.
Oh, it is for sure. I guess that was quite an experience because we drove up to Grand Portage and then we went up to Thunder Bay. And the way you get in the wintertime is you hop on the helicopter and you have to throw on all of your cold water survival gear and all of that stuff and hop in, and then they fly you out to the island, and that's how you do it in the wintertime. So that's quite the experience getting out there too. I think it all kind of adds to the flavor, I guess.
We're talking with Drew Rush today on the podcast. He's a photographer, educator, naturalist, and I do have to ask you this, Drew. We asked you about getting into photography, but how do you make that leap into becoming a photographer that is affiliated with National Geographic?
I was just kind of shooting all the time, trying to kind of build up a portfolio of work, and as I was doing that, I was kind of meeting people. Jackson is a great place. They kind of refer to it as the Silicon Couloir sometimes because of all of the people that kind of pass through there. A guy that lived across the street from me at one point used to intern at a magazine that's out of print now called National Geographic Adventure.
Okay. Yep.
And I knew that for a little while, but like I said, I was kind of trying to build up, what I thought would be a worthy submission. And when I finally had done that, I said, hey Sean, do you know anybody that I could reach out to there and try and get on a needs list? Magazines and publications have these lists that editors send out monthly, saying I have a hole that needs filled here or here. And he said, yeah, sure. So he gave me somebody's email address, and I reached out to him, sent him some pictures, and I said, hey, could you put me on a list? And they said, yeah. And that was my very first kind of entree into the geographic world. And then maybe 5 or 6 months later, I got one of those emails saying that they needed some pictures of bison in the wintertime. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I had been guiding snowmobile trips for the last 5 or 6 years, so I had that in spades, and I sent in a bunch of pictures of bison in the wintertime up in Yellowstone, and they ended up publishing one of those, and that just kind of came and went. And a few months after that, I got an email from somebody reaching out saying, we've seen your work in our publication, and we noticed that you're not represented by us. Is that something that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, you said, sure, of course.
Let me think about that.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to say, that you give that spiel to anybody and have them say no.
Right.
But I said, of course, and that led to me joining the National Geographic Image Collection, which was kind of their stock photography thing, and then it all really just kind of snowballed from there.
Oh, my gosh. And the word snowball, I want to get to that in just a second, too, because Drew works in cold weather. And
right.
Walt, you and I know, we know that cold weather doesn't always work very well for electronic equipment
right.
and cameras and all kinds of things. But I want to take a step back. The remote camera specialist. Yeah, that's a new one for me. But just let me know, how is it that not only you have all these credentials, but this little specialty, and how that came about?
Well, growing up, I remember flipping through Geographic constantly, and I remember specifically like experiences of going to the library and knowing where they had all of these bound copies of Geographic on the shelves, and I would just grab them and just sit there and flip through them, and that I realize how important that is now. looking back on it. But what I was really doing was kind of like studying the style of the magazine and the style of their shooting. And the wildlife stuff, I always really just gravitated towards that. And so I just kind of started to know the work of the people that were in the magazine and the style in which that they were doing it. And at that time, it was kind of a hard thing to figure out. It was kind of like pre-internet, so you were scouring text and, things like that, trying to figure out what these remote cameras were. And then I started to kind of get some info about who made the actual units that trip the camera when it's sitting out there by itself. And I found out the company, and I called the company. It just happened that the company was, just this mom and pop operation. And the guy, the owner, the manufacturer, answered the phone and spilled the beans to me for like an hour and a half and told me exactly how all of the remote camera setups worked.
What is it you're actually doing there? When we talk about remote camera specialist, you're setting up cameras. I mean, I guess it's kind of a hope that you're going to get a good shot, obviously. But I mean, tell us a little bit about that procedure, that process. What do you do?
Sure. Well, you're basically talking about, putting any kind of camera or video camera or whatever in a situation where you feel like that you're going to get some action out in front of it and leaving it and having that camera be able to trigger itself by having the animal walk in front of it. And, there's an infrared beam, essentially, or an infrared field that gets triggered, and then it starts the camera either recording or shooting stills or, whatever. And so, like I said, that could be a small little Browning hunting camera, or it could be a little bit larger, more elaborate, kind of like traditional DSLR-looking camera, attached to some other stuff that kind of makes it fire. But, that's the idea. And, so the thing about it is that, anybody can grab one of these camera setups and walk out into the woods and say, there's a trail. Let's put it up here and hope that something walks by it. But the trick with it is really finding a spot where you say the animal is going to stand right there. And where that right there is makes a composition that, really works either in a film video format or a still image that, makes somebody stop and really say, whoa.
So it's an eye, too. Obviously, you have an eye for the shot composition, the way it would hopefully, go into your rules of thirds and all of that and centered and everything, which, of course, you can manipulate if you need to, but you're really looking to capture it as it happens, aren't you?
Not only that, Drew, but right time, right place, right light. Light.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is really just like mind-numbingly repetitive because it takes so long to get it, and a lot of people ask me, I get a lot of people asking me about how to do it now. And one of the things that I always tell them is that, I'll spend more time looking for the right place to set up a camera than I will just going out and throwing one up because I think something will walk by there. I would rather find the location that is drop-dead gorgeous or that you can, light so it's drop-dead gorgeous or will work at a certain time of day or, something like that. And then just, again, combining that with the idea that you're looking at it saying the animal's going to stand right here, not, it's going to walk by, but it's going to stand in this exact spot.
You were on, day after day hunting with another photographer. The miles you put on to find these locations.
Yeah, one of the very first gig that Geographic asked me to kind of go out and do on my own was to go help this other guy who was working on a pine beetle story. And they said that they needed some pictures of these grizzly bears eating white bark pine cones. And so, I said, yeah, let's do it. And, we went out And I was out there, and Peter called me. He said, "Hey, I want to go out and see this go down." And I said, "Let's go." So we spent like 5, 6 days maybe just driving around, just hiking around, just looking for places to put this stuff up. And at the end of it, we hadn't set up a single camera. And Peter finally looked at me and, he said, "I don't know how you do it. We haven't touched a camera. We haven't taken a single picture, and almost a week has gone by." So it's not for everybody, because the amount of time it takes is just, like I said, it's kind of mind-numbing sometimes.
We're talking with Drew Rush. He's a photographer, educator, naturalist. And, Drew, one of the things about this is I'm hearing you saying that there's a lot of travel, a lot of location scouting, a lot of getting around, and you've also got to get gear there, and you've got to make sure that everything is in the right place and powered up properly and all of that. How do you manage that? Tell us a little bit about what it is to go on location for one of these shoots.
Oh, man, the first gig I did as an assistant for Geographic, I went to India for 4 months. Jeez. And we took 32 bags and cases. That's probably the most gear I've been responsible for. I slept in the back of a truck with it overnight when we drove down to Bandhavgarh National Park. I was so terrified I was going to have something stolen or lost. These days I've got my system down, traveling around in kind of North America. I can do it in about maybe 5 duffel bags, and I could go for a few months at a time if I needed to in those duffel bags.
Really?
But, throwing the gear around, and, that's just one of the fun things about it. You get to have so many fun things associated with the job. It's just a lot of fun to do.
Well, then you not only have to have that gear with you, but all the different types for all the different really climates. So cold
That's
weather.
Right.
And then even when you're at Isle Royale in August, we're going to be honest, it could snow on you. And it's water, and it feels like lava rock. I mean, it's not an easy place to get around. What have you found there is really helpful? And of course, I got to say, number one, and I'm so grateful that your introduction to Lake Superior was with Dave Miller. And we know that Dave and his boat can get you just about anywhere, but not always into the shallowest spots.
Yeah.
So what we found there was the best thing to do is I brought one of my inflatable paddleboards, stand-up paddleboards out. And so what we'll do is we'll blow that up and put it on the deck in the back, and we'll kind of putt in close to shore, and then we'll just throw the paddleboard over, and I'll hop on that and take off. And so our first trip is coming up. It's going to be in May. And so when I do that in May, or here in a couple weeks, rather, sorry, when I do that here in a week or so, what I'll have is some kind of like neoprene booties on my feet and an old pair of tennis shoes. And then I'll have some wetsuit bottoms and probably a pair of shorts on over that. And then I've got a kind of a wetsuit top that I'll put on, and then I'll probably have my puffy coat on over that just to keep me warm.
So all kinds of layers and all kinds of different things like that, because especially talking May, we know how volatile that can be.
Well, there could very well still be ice on the North Shore at Isle Royale. I mean, we've had a very, very mild winter, but you get into some of those coves. And when you go, Drew, you're going to retrieve some of these cameras that you've set up, right?
That's right. Well, the plan was to go back over the winter, but the island was closed, no winter operations. And the plan was to go back twice and, maintain the cameras and kind of do that. But, that didn't happen. So I've just kind of been chomping at the bit to get back up there and see what we've got, because when we left, we went to a new side of the island and to some kind of new spots where we thought that there would be some really good activity, and, haven't had a chance to see anything. My biggest concern is that, stuff is broken or I set a couple of cameras a little low, hoping, again for that right angle, but there is some worry about, ice and things like that. So I'm just really kind of nervous, to be honest with you, about what I'm going to find when I get back there.
I'm talking with Drew Rush. He's a photographer, educator, naturalist, and of course on your plans there is to go, Drew, and harvest the cameras, see what you got. But I have to ask you this. It's like I'm hearing you talk about a lot of this effort and a lot of this work that you do. You obviously have a passion and a desire for this. You want to get that great shot. You want to get that moment captured. What are some of the favorite maybe images you've got? What do you like to shoot? And what are what's a couple of the top Drew Rush photos, the images that you've captured?
Sure. I think a lot of people probably would recognize work that I do with predators. I got lucky in that when I really started focusing on wildlife photography as a career, it was volunteering and photographing mountain lion research projects in Jackson. And it just kind of kept going from there. And, grizzly bears, wolves, things like that. And so I really just got lucky with the subject matter. In terms of top shots, man, mountain lion stuff, any mountain lion shot I get, I just love, because it takes so much work to try and make it happen. I've got one that I really love that I got on a geographic assignment up in Yellowstone, where it's standing in front of a rack of elk antlers that have been kind of decomposing for a few years. I love that one. More recently, I've got a shot of a moose from Isle Royale that I just love. I'm kind of trying some new techniques with the camera traps and using ambient light and things like that to kind of try and show movement and things like that. And this moose shot from Isle Royale really kind of started to come together. But when the camera trap image finally works, I just love it, because again, it just takes so long to make it happen. It's hard to pick a favorite, I think.
And Drew, your aim at Isle Royale is basically you're capturing what we know of developing wolf packs. We don't know if we've got any cubs, but you'll be able to tell us, and I probably get some pretty good shots of them. Also then about the moose. That's basically what you're working at Isle Royale, right?
Well, you have to, when it starting out working with the foundation, it was really focused on wolves. And then, it still is focused heavily on getting those shots. But where we have been putting our cameras, where we've been placing our cameras, we've just been getting a tremendous amount of, other unique stuff, fox behavior that, you don't get to see every day. Moose and wolves, for that matter, also swimming back and forth from island to island, for example. Just a tremendous variety of things. So it's been fun to kind of share that with people and let people discover that and see the abundance of things that are going on aside from wolves.
We're talking with Drew Rush, photographer, educator, and naturalist here on our podcast today. And I'm curious, with your Isle Royale work, Drew, is there perhaps maybe an area that you'd consider perhaps a gem that you've discovered about Isle Royale that maybe not many know about? Is there something that resonates with you there? I'm not sure about just one spot. I mean, the whole place is just fantastic. I wasn't very familiar with it when I, started going out there. But, just the whole thing is just amazing. It's so much fun to be out there on the paddleboard, like on the water, and just kind of experience that and see it. I don't know if I could say just one place. Maybe paddleboarding over. My wife Mandy came with me on a trip, and maybe we paddleboarded over to the America wreck one morning. We got up when it was
really glassy calm, and we paddled over from Grace Harbor, and we paddled around the America wreck and caught a few Lakers off of the bow, and maybe that place.
Do you remember what you were using? You share that with me, and my husband and I have circumnavigated in our kayaks, but now I love being on a paddleboard. And when you just shared that, I get goose pimples, and I know exactly. And certainly, my first experience over the America was with Dave Miller, but then I also had a chance when I flew to Isle Royale to fly over it, and it is such a great story, and of course the shipwreck history of our Lake Superior parks is just remarkable too. But I want to take a step here for a second, because I am a board member of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, and people wonder, why should I give to the foundation? And you are a prime example that through learning with Curiosity Stream, our work to get this documentary together, it's so sad that we had 61 years, I believe, of winter study on the island. And of course, this last year we weren't able to continue with that. But just documenting this wolf relocation, and where Walt and I are talking to you from, we had a moose relocation that was back in the late 70s here in our area, and how that establishes just such a new chapter in our wildlife history in our area. And I'm so grateful that the foundation was able to go to bat and get you to get to the island, and then making these stories happen. Because when you head over there, I think you're due in May 18th or so, you'll be heading over to the island?
Exactly, that's right.
And how long do you anticipate it'll take for rounding up all your camera or your memory cards, really, right?
It's gonna take probably in the neighborhood of 7 days, something like that. That's moving pretty good. Because what we'll do is we'll get to the cameras, again, go through that process of hopping on shore, hiking into wherever they may be, and then swapping out memory cards, downloading that stuff. And, one of the important things there is really analyzing your data, you know what I mean, and looking at what you are getting or what you're hopefully getting rather than what you're not getting. And kind of exploiting that, right? So, you get your cameras up in a good spot, you're getting a lot of good stuff. You can kind of start to think about moving stuff around, which takes time. So you're just trying to really move as quickly as possible. But, man, it's hard because you want to, again, I could just hike all over that island and, be happy as a clam looking for spots. But I know we have to keep going.
Drew, can I put you on the spot? Can I ask you here, when you come back, can we talk to you again? Can we find out I feel like, oh man, I want to be do you need a Sherpa?
You betcha.
Oh man. And there he goes again. I love that he uses that you betcha. But we would just love to connect with you again after this to find out, how, you've had a wolf eat your camera, but that was in Alaska?
Yeah, I think I had one kind of nibble on one here also. They'll do that occasionally. I don't know if it's like a frequency thing that we can't hear something. Maybe they're kind of trying to gnaw on it, but every now and then you'll get even like a moose will come over and sniff it, and if they don't chew on it, they'll knock it over, and so you'll end up with some kind of skewed vision of what you're trying to get. But for that matter, in terms of sharing and where this work is going, I do want to say thank you to the foundation, because I think it's fantastic that you guys have the vision to work with people like that to get that content in front of those people, because that's really where a lot of the future conservation work is going to come from. It's from those kids that are learning about places around them. So.
We're talking with
Thank
Drew
you
Rush
guys for
today.
that.
You know, Drew, I got to say this, Drew Rush with us, photographer, educator, naturalist. As we wrap up with you here today, I have a question, though, for you, and that is, how can we learn more about your work? How can we see some of it, find out more about some of the projects you've done, support you? I'm assuming that you probably have a few pieces that if people wanted to, they could buy a print or something from you. How do they find out more about what you do?
You bet. So the easiest way, probably the way that stays the most current, is the Instagram feed. That's at Drew T. Rush. And, that gets the most kind of current, up-to-date stuff, some of the kind of behind-the-scenes stuff, checking cameras, how we're working with cameras and things like that. Also sharing that with the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation social media, Instagram. You can go to my website, drewrush.com. and see more there, too.
Man, this has been really cool, Drew. We certainly appreciate your time this morning. Big smiles in the studio here talking with you today. Because you're just...
Well, thank you guys so much.
You make it sound like, you just kind of, eased into it and got this gig and everything like that. But it's a credit to your skill. It's a credit to your eye. And it's a credit to your patience and your passion for this. And we appreciate you sharing about it today. It's been really interesting.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me on, and I look forward to keep putting it out there.
That is Drew Rush joining us here today, and he is a photographer, educator, and naturalist. Frida, it's just been interesting talking to him today. I mean, all of these podcasts have really been interesting in their own ways, but what I'm seeing or hearing through all of it is people that have a real passion for doing what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely. And, well, just you and I know we've been on some crazy projects in our life, and being someone, and I sure hope our folks will go to capture those images, because he has that grizzly bear looking at him after that pine beetle that they went looking out for, and you can see the snow on this grizzly, his mountain lion picture, all of these, they are those amazing moments. Just a quick flash. But what it takes to get to that, have that flash happen.
Absolutely. So when you see Drew's images in particular, but all photographers, nature photographers, outdoor photographers in particular, it is not an easy thing to do. He does great work. We appreciate his time today. I encourage you to go look up Drew Rush. Just go look him up on the internet. So I'm sure you'll find him. And as he said, drewrush.com and all of that. I guess that's probably going to do it for us here. We want to remind you, of course, to go and follow all of these podcasts on the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation website. They're out there, and support the organization as best as you can as well, because it funds projects like what Drew has been doing and is continuing to do. So I think it's just been a fascinating few moments here with Drew, and we'll wrap it up with that, and appreciate you guys all listening to the podcast today. I'm Walt Lindola.
And I'm Frida Wara. Please join us again. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Wara.
And I'm Walt Lindola. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.